En un entorno global y competitivo, accede a educación a través de medios digitales, sesiones en vivo, aulas y bibliotecas virtuales, metodología práctica y soporte técnico. Universidad del Pacífico, Live Streaming.
Buenos días, mi nombre es Leonardo Gutiérrez, soy profesor investigador de la Universidad del Pacífico y seré el moderador de la charla de hoy en la mañana. Nuestra invitada de hoy es la doctora Marjolein Van Oppen. Ella es catedrática y científica de la Universidad de Gante en Bélgica. Aparte, también ella trabaja como chair técnica en el proyecto Capture, que es un vínculo entre la Academia de Bélgica y la industria privada. Específicamente el tema que vamos a tratar es tratamiento de aguas, es decir, desalinización de agua de mar y agua salobre para la producción de agua potable. Lo dejo en este momento con la doctora Marjolein Van Oppen. Marjolein, you can go on, please.
Okay. Thanks, Leo. I didn't get all of that, but I understand that now it's my turn to talk. So hello, everyone. I think Leo already introduced me quite a bit, so I'll keep it short, but my name is Marjolein. As he said, I work at Ghent University in Belgium, and today I'm going to talk to you briefly about some of my experiences with sea and brackish water desalination for drinking water supply. So this is all from a Belgian perspective. So I'm hoping to show you how here in Belgium we are tackling some of the water shortages that we are facing and what our current supply looks like and what we are planning in the future with this brackish and seawater desalination. So a short introduction, you might recognize Leo on here somewhere, I think. I'm not even sure. There, yeah, of course, the only one with a beer in his hand. This is a part of the research group we're working at. So Ghent is a city in Belgium. It's not the capital, but it's one of the bigger cities, a big university city. And I graduated on the campus of bioscience engineering in 2012, started my PhD there, that I finished in 2016. And right now I'm a postdoc. And my position at university is sponsored by industry. So I really work on the intersection between academic research and industrial application, trying to make sure that our research, on one hand, is relevant for industry and can get applied as fast as possible. On the other hand, to make sure that industry has access to the newest developments and can move forward towards sustainability as fast as possible. So my daily tasks are following up on projects, guiding of students, applying for new projects, of course. And I do a lot of communication as well, which apparently Leo likes, so he asked me to be here today. So thank you for the invitation. Just to kind of give you an idea of how things work practically for me and for our faculty, there's two major connections here that are important. The first one is I'm connected to Capture. Now, Capture is a research platform that basically operates on this intersection between academia and industry. So it's very new. It's only been around for a few years. And it helps researchers and companies to basically work together. So Capture focuses on 3 different domains. It focuses on water, plastics, and CO2. So 3 very important domains while we move forward to a sustainable society. And of course, I'm most involved in the water fit for use pipeline, as we call it. So Capture basically enables us to work together with companies and enables companies access to our research. And the way we do that is we invite companies to become a part of Capture. There's a financial contribution attached to that, and with that, we conduct our research, we guide our students, and we give them access to the research. So that's one important platform that is part of my network and my daily activities. And then, as I said, I'm part of the Water Fit for Use one. And just to give you an idea, all of the names you see here on the right are companies that are involved in this Water Fit for Use platform. So this is just the water one. Interesting to know is that among all of the companies that you see here, almost all of the drinking water companies in Belgium are involved. Others are technology providers, even with a few drinking water companies from the Netherlands as well. And Dow is a chemical company. There's all different kinds of companies involved in this platform. So it's a really interesting development. It's very, very nice to be able to do research, but also see that applied in practice and see that being used. A second important connection is the chair position, so the industry that sponsors my position. And the company that does this is Evides. Evides is a company that has a branch in drinking water and a branch in industrial water. So the fancy name for my position is Chair Industrial and Circular Water Technology. If I'm not mistaken, I heard Leo translate that in Spanish as well. And the interesting thing is Evides is a Dutch company. So it's from the Netherlands. While I'm in Belgium, of course, these are 2 pretty small countries, but we work together a lot when it comes to water. We're very interlinked. We speak more or less the same language, so that helps. So Evides has been sponsoring my position at university now for 3 years. Should continue for at least another 2, and they're probably going to extend it afterwards. The logos I put here are a few companies, but also a few projects. Improved was a very important project for us, ended end of last year. And within that project, for example, what we did, to give you an idea of what we do, we developed a mobile testing unit that we could place on site with chemical companies. And the 3 that we used were on the slide as well. It's Dow, BASF, and Yara, 3 big chemical companies. And the way you have to imagine it is we've put technologies, water treatment technologies, in shipping containers. And so they're much bigger than what you would typically see in a lab environment, but they're still a lot smaller than what you would typically see in an industrial setting. But this enables these companies to really test different treatment technologies that they do not have on site, but with their own water, during their own production, without interfering with the production, and really seeing what these technologies are capable of. So that really accelerates the access of these technologies into these markets, into these industries. If you just Google improved water, there's a whole website. You can also take a virtual tour inside our testing facilities, but I'm not going to focus on that today. And on the right side, you see Socorro. It's the newest project that started in March, which focuses on the connection between water quality in industry, but also in a marine environment, and corrosion. Because corrosion is a often very underestimated cost in industry. So that's something that we're going to work on in the coming years. But these are just two of the projects that we're involved in. There's many more, but time, of course, is limited. But now on to the topic of today. So I promised I would talk to you about desalination. Now, to tell you why desalination is so important, I have to go into water stress first. I'm not sure how much you guys know about Belgium, but the average Belgian thinks that it rains a lot in Belgium and that we're a very wet country. Although that might be true, we are facing quite high water stress as well. And that's simply because we have a very small country. We have a population of around 11, 12 million people, so very high population density. And that means that although there is a lot of water, there's also a lot of people needing that water. So our water demand is pretty high. So we are rated as a high stress company. I'm really hoping Google helped me and I've indicated Ecuador correctly on the chart. But you guys have much lower water stress than our teeny tiny country has. And you can also see we really stand out in Europe for some reason. So just to give you an idea, Belgium on this list of water stress indicators, we are at spot 23. So between typical very dry countries like Morocco and Mexico, or countries that you would associate with drought anyway. And Ecuador, if I'm not mistaken, yeah, it's at 81. So just as a comparison, what does this mean? This basically means that in Belgium, we use up or we need 40 to 60% of all the water that comes in naturally to be able to foresee in our water demand. And that's a very high number. That means that we don't have a lot of buffer, and that if we face a long period of drought, we might come into problems. For those of you who are not familiar with Belgium, we're a pretty funny little country. This is the map of Belgium and the different provinces. But besides these different provinces, Belgium is basically split in two. The northern part speaks Dutch. It's called Flanders. It's where Ghent is. Ghent is in the gray part, East Flanders. And the southern part, the southern 5 provinces are in the Walloon region, and they speak French. It's also next to France, and the Dutch-speaking part is also next to the Netherlands, but we are a separate country. Most of what I'm going to say or talk about today relates to Flanders, because of this division, we also have a very complicated political system. We have one general government, we have a Flemish government, we have a Walloon government. There's all different types of government, lots of people discussing, lots of time taken before decisions are made. To give you an idea, we went to vote for our new government in May of 2019. We are now July 2020, and we still don't have a new government. So that's how Belgium works. But today, mostly, I'm going to talk about Flanders. So this is only the northern part of Belgium. The white spot in the middle is Brussels. And what's depicted here on this figure is the different drinking water companies in Belgium. So these 5 companies, even though we're so small, we have 5 different drinking water companies, 6, sorry, and these provide all of the drinking water that we use. Now, in Flanders, about half of our drinking water comes from surface water, so man-made channels, rivers, this type of thing, and 50% comes from groundwater, so groundwater wells. There's one special case, the one on the left, IWVA. They also produce drinking water out of wastewater effluents. So part of their drinking water supply comes from secondary treated wastewater, and they're pretty unique with that in Western Europe. But for the rest, the further east you go, mostly the more groundwater wells are used. And then in the middle, where the purple is where Waterlink is, there's a lot of surface water, and then to the west, it's kind of a mixture of both. Now, these drinking water companies, of course, with climate change, with droughts, we've had an incredible period of drought the last couple of months. They're starting to look into alternative water sources. Why? Well, this is a headline of a few weeks ago. For the first time, I think, ever, there was a city in Belgium where there was no water coming out of the taps. So the literal translation of the headline here is no water out of a tap in Overijse, which is the name of the city. Inhabitants can go get water through the drive-in. So I think this really hit home for a lot of people. This really made people realize that, hey, we do have an issue. We do need to do something. Now, this was a combination of works being done in a drinking water network and a nice weather weekend and Corona still going on, so everyone's staying at home. So water usage skyrocketed that weekend, and the water companies just couldn't keep up with supply, and they had no more water coming out of their tap for a few days, if I'm not mistaken. This is something in Belgium that we are not used to at all. We're very used to getting up in the morning, opening the tap, and water coming out for as long as we want. Another graph to indicate how bad the situation at the moment is. This is a graph that shows you the groundwater levels compared to the last 30 years, so the average of the last 30 years. Red is never a good color. In the beginning of this month, 61% of our groundwater levels were less or a lot less than normal. Only 40% was normal or a little bit more. So more than 60% of locations, our groundwater levels were very, very low. You can see that in March, we had a short period of a lot of rain, February and March, but it didn't help much. So we're currently again in a situation where our groundwater levels are at a very low point. So although Belgium is not known for its nice weather, for lots of sunshine, we do have a lot of water issues, and it just shows that it's not always the usual suspects that can have issues. I'm going to talk about two different cases today of how drinking water companies are tackling this, and the first one is brackish water desalination. So Ostende, the word that you see there on top, is the name of a city close to the coast in Belgium, and they have a WPC, a water production center, that opened in March of this year, where they produce 12,000 cubic meters a day of drinking water from brackish water. So it is surface water, but it's a channel that's connected to the sea. So the water is a lot more salty than typical river water, which is used in half of the rest of Flanders. Now, what is the issue with that? Of course, brackish water contains a lot more salt. And where in traditional drinking water treatment, you would only need to remove iron, some organic contaminants, that type of thing. With brackish water, and definitely with seawater, it becomes very important to remove the salts, which is why in red here it's indicated that the heart of this installation is membranes. Now, membranes are something that our research group has a lot of expertise on. The membranes that are depicted here are nanofiltration and reverse osmosis for the people that know a bit about that. And especially reverse osmosis is able to retain most of the salts, if not all of them. So that's a big advantage of these membranes. Especially reverse osmosis can basically retain all contaminants up until viruses, bacteria, organic micropollutants. So we have a lot of issues or a lot of concern about pharmaceuticals and pesticides ending up in these waters. They can also be retained by reverse osmosis, and it retains all the salts. The downside of reverse osmosis, and I'll come back to that later as well, is these membranes, these filters are so dense that you need a very high pressure to push the water through. And a very high pressure means high energy consumption. So one of the downsides of tapping into these alternative water sources is you'll need more energy. So this is something called the water energy nexus, where to produce energy, you need high quality water, and to produce high quality water, you need energy. So especially towards a sustainable future, this is going to become very challenging. The other steps that you see here are basically activated carbon, so another step to remove pharmaceuticals and pesticides, should there still be any, also removal of color and smell or odor, and then a few disinfection steps. Those are the most important steps in this process. So they produce 12,000 cubic meters a day. They can do that in about 1 hour. So from the water coming into it coming out of the tap takes about 1 hour. It's a very new, very novel installation. They use very new technologies also to control microbiological growth and these organic micropollutants. And the installation is built in such a way that it anticipates that in the future, it might have to expand. They can double their production capacity in the future, and they can also tune their installation to higher salt concentrations and even seawater in the future. At the moment, that's not necessary, or not yet anyway, but they are expecting this to be possible in the future. Faris, the company here, is one of the drinking water companies in Flanders that also, by the way, provides drinking water in Ghent, for example. A second example, or a second application or alternative water source, is seawater. Now, seawater desalination has been around for a long time, a very long time, especially in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Israel, these type of countries. They do not have access to groundwater or surface water, or not enough anyway, and they've been desalinating seawater for decennia. That's why Middle East, North Africa, East Asia, Pacific take up over 60, almost 70% of desalination capacity worldwide. Western Europe is only 9%, for example, Latin America and the Caribbean, 6%. So there is already a lot of seawater desalination going on in the world, and it has been going on for decades. Now, desalination is very general. 60% of the desalination capacity is desalination of seawater. 20% is brackish water, and the other ones are lower salinity sources, but we still call it desalination. So 60% of desalination capacity is seawater. Now, this is a bit more of a technical slide for those of you who are familiar with this, but when we think about seawater desalination, people usually think about two ways of desalinating seawater. One of them is evaporating the water, so simply boiling it in a bit more of technical, a bit more technical than just boiling it, of course, but boiling it under different pressures and temperatures is one of the traditional ways of desalinating seawater. In the left figure, that's represented by multi-stage flash distillation and multi-effect distillation. These are the traditional ways of desalinating seawater, but they take a lot of energy. So to produce 1,000 liters of desalinated seawater with these technologies would take up to 15 to 20 kilowatt hours of energy. Just as a comparison, I'm not sure what the average energy usage in Ecuador is, but in Belgium, the average Belgian uses 2 kilowatt hours of energy per day. So it's 10 times more than that. Over the last couple of years / decade, reverse osmosis has become much more important and has overtaken these technologies as the most important technology for seawater desalination. So 70% of all seawater desalination nowadays is done by reverse osmosis. So that's again the same technology as I mentioned with the brackish water desalination. So it's a very dense membrane, very dense filter that filters out anything, and what comes out is pure water. So it also retains sodium chloride, so the most important salt in brackish and seawater, of course. Now, the downside stays the same. Because it has to retain all of these salts, and there's a lot of salt in seawater, this takes a lot of energy. The graph on the right shows you how much energy reverse osmosis needs and how that energy demand has changed over the years. So in the 70s, reverse osmosis would still require around 15 kilowatt hours for 1,000 liters of drinking water. Nowadays, we are more around 2 kilowatt hours per cubic meter of drinking water. I've also indicated in the dotted line the around 1.1 kilowatt hours per cubic meter, and that is because that's our practical or theoretical thermodynamic limit, as we call it. Desalination is always going to require energy. If all of our systems work perfect in an ideal world, that desalination would cost us 1.1 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. So the 2 is only due because of losses, because of inefficiencies in the system, but it also shows you that we're not going to be able to go much further below that 2. Our system is never going to be completely perfect, of course. So seawater desalination, around 2 kilowatt hours per cubic meter of energy, which is about the same as the energy usage on average of a Belgian person per day. Now, when a couple of years ago, 8 years ago now already, I applied for a scholarship to do my PhD, my subject was to make seawater desalination more energy friendly. And I applied for a scholarship with the Flemish government, and I was refused my scholarship twice because they couldn't see the use of desalination in Belgium. Now, we've come a long way over those 8 years. So I was very happy and a bit, let's say, I'll call it surprised, when last year we were contacted by the Water Group, the water group, literally translated, one of the drinking water companies in Belgium, to help them investigate how to implement seawater desalination in Belgium. So over these 8 years, they've come from, we're never going to do that, to help us figure out how to do it. Now, there's, of course, a few things to keep in mind. If you want to implement seawater desalination, especially in Belgium, a country that's very developed, that has access to the newest technology, etc., we want to do that as sustainable as possible. In theory, we could call a company today, tell them we want to desalinate seawater tomorrow, and they can come and install it, and it'll work. But it won't be the most sustainable option. We want to look at coupling it with sustainable energy. In Belgium, we do have a coastline. We have a lot of windmills producing wind energy on our sea surface, and it's still increasing. So we want to couple it with that. We also want to think about, does seawater needs to be a main source of drinking water, or do we only want to use it as a backup because it's very energy intensive? And can we couple that with other applications? Like if we don't need a lot of extra drinking water in winter times, for example, or in wet periods, can we use that installation, for example, to produce water for hydrogen gas production? Because in Belgium, we're talking a lot of the transition to a hydrogen economy where hydrogen gas is used as an energy carrier. Can we use that installation to produce ultra pure water for industry, for example? Because you don't want to build something that's only going to work 10 or 20% of the time. So we went into a study with them to see how this would work. Now, I don't want you to look at all the details because it's going to take us way too far. But what we did was we looked at different technologies and combinations of technologies and looked at how they performed based on 7 different parameters. How much energy would they need? How much waste would they generate? Are they ready to be implemented? What's their market readiness? How much maintenance do they need? How efficient are they water-wise? How much chemicals do they need? And what would they cost to implement? Now, this score is just arbitrary, but you can see that the highest scores are for SWRO, seawater reverse osmosis, or a combination of electrodialysis and brackish water reverse osmosis. Again, not to go into detail, it's going to lead us way too far, but this is very interesting because the first one, the seawater RO, is basically the standard classic state-of-the-art technology, while ED, brackish water RO, is much newer. not implemented in practice yet, but has a very high potential and is breaking through to the market. And as you can see, the capital cost is lower, so it could be a potentially interesting technology. And the next step, what we're working on at the moment, is to try and test this on a bigger scale, to test this on a pilot scale together with the Water Group. Now, a second thing that I talked about was coupling it with sustainable energy. And this is part of the study that we did not do, but a group that is specialized in sustainable energy looked at this and looked at how to optimize the use of wind energy or grid energy, and how we can optimize that, and when to produce water, when to store water, so that it would be as cheap as possible with maximum use of sustainable energy. So another thing to really take into account. And then a last one that's often overlooked when looking into seawater desalination is, what do you do with the brine? So usually in seawater desalination, what happens is you have 1,000 liters of seawater with around 35 grams of sodium chloride. And from that 1,000 liters, you produce 500 liters of drinking water. That means that you have 500 liters of seawater left that now contains 70 grams per liter of sodium chloride, more or less. And traditionally what's done is that brine, as we call it, that concentrate, is dumped back into the sea. But there it can create a lot of ecological issues, because the organisms living there are not built to withstand these high concentrations of salt. It can form blankets of very salty water on the bottom of the sea, especially in closed-off systems such as the Mediterranean and the sea there. This can cause very big issues. This is also an issue that is not resolved yet. Brine discharge is what is used now. Zero liquid discharge is very, very expensive. Selective salt recovery bears the question, what are you going to do with the salt? It's not economically interesting. Same with mineral recovery and chemical production. You could recover some energy from it and then dump the diluted brine, but again, that's a technology that's not market ready yet. So for now, actually, most of the focus is on a sustainable possible brine discharge and less on what are we going to do with the components in there. So to conclude my short presentation, climate change, anywhere you live, is going to make water challenges inevitable. In Belgium, as in a lot of places in the world, the focus is on water shortage. In other places, there will be water access, flooding, etc. But for me, before we go into alternative water sources, priority number one is always to look at the most efficient use of the current water sources. What can we do to make sure that they are not depleted as fast? How can we use them more efficiently and more sustainably? So how do we lower our water footprint? On one hand, from the production side, how can we make production more water efficient? On the other hand, from the water consumption side, how can we as consumers decrease our water consumption? And then, of course, from an industrial point of view, but also from a lower level household point of view, make sure that we have shorter chains, smaller water chains, more reuse of our wastewaters, less wastewater treatment that's done back into our natural systems. As a backup, of course, we have to look at alternative water sources. And I talked about a few today. So wastewater reuse is already implemented somewhat in Belgium, although indirectly. Brackish water is now since March in operation, and seawater desalination will probably come into operation in the coming years. So I know this was very short, very fast, and but I hope I was able to tell you some new things and you learned something. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. Or follow me on social media. I post a lot of stuff there as well. If you do email me, make sure to put Leo in CC, because the next coming months I won't be as available since I'm expecting our first baby in a few weeks. So I'll be focusing on a different little projects besides desalination. But I'm sure Leo will be able to help you with a lot of questions as well. And afterwards, I'll be happy to answer all of them through email as well. So thank you very much. That was my talk.
Thank you very much, Marcia. Actually, we have a couple of questions, okay, if you still have some minutes.
Yeah.
So, yeah, number one, it's there's some industry with large water footprint in Belgium, I guess, okay? So is there any legislation penalizing this huge water footprint, or is there any laws or legislation in this case, for example, like trying to induce these companies to reduce the water footprint?
There is some legislation, although it probably should be better and there should be more. The thing with these large industries is they're also the first ones to feel it when there is a water shortage. So they're very aware of the issue. To give you an example, we work with BASF, which is a very large international chemical company. And just in 2018, I think, we had a very long period of drought as well, which actually caused their plant in Germany to have to shut down production for a while. Just because the River Rhine that they used to transport their resources, the level was so low that they couldn't get their resources in or out. Now, for these big companies, a day or even an hour of non-production means millions of losses. So they're very, very aware of the issue, and they're working very hard out of their own motivation already to reduce their water footprint. And that's what we're noticing as well in the industrial work that we do, is that there's a lot of demand from industry to implement this type of technologies. And legislation doesn't always help, because whenever you look at water reuse and water recycling, you're going to be confronted with these brines, with these waste streams that contain components that you can't do anything with. And legislation doesn't make it easy to do anything with them. So as a company, you can't just say, my neighbor can use them, let's ship them there. There's a lot of regulations around that. It's not that easy. So a lot of companies are a bit afraid to start doing that, and that hampers reuse projects a bit. So legislation could do a lot more, but there's a lot of intrinsic motivation of the companies already.
So I have another question, very interesting, by the way. What is the difference between, in terms of energy consumption, between desalinating seawater, high content of salt, and brackish water? Is it big?
So if you look at seawater, this 2 kilowatt hours per cubic meter is only the reverse osmosis system. If you account all of the pre-treatment, the post-treatment, the transport, and everything, it's probably around double that, so 4 to 5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. If we're talking traditional drinking water production from freshwater sources, you're around 1.5 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. And brackish water, depending on the concentration, is somewhere in between that. So there is a factor 2 to 3 difference between freshwater and seawater, and then brackish water is somewhere in between.
I have another question. So in addition to removing salt, I'm talking about reverse osmosis. In addition to removing salts, does it remove some other kind of pollutants, for example, like any kind of pesticides or pharmaceuticals or heavy metals? Does it?
Yeah. So reverse osmosis removes almost all components in your water, but it's not perfect. When we're looking at pharmaceuticals, depending on, and pesticides, for example, depending on which one we're talking about, on average, the removal in reverse osmosis is 85 to 90%. So some of them are removed to a much higher extent, 99% or higher. Some of them are a bit lower, but the average is 85 to 90% removal of pharmaceuticals and pesticides. Heavy metals are almost completely removed. The biggest challenge with seawater desalination and reverse osmosis is boron removal. Because I could go into this, but it's because boron is very small, and because of the charge, it goes through the membrane very easily. So depending on the original concentration, you need some post-treatments to remove the boron from your drinking water, because limits in drinking water are very strict. You don't want too much boron in your drinking water. So that's actually the biggest challenge. But what a lot of drinking water companies, whether it's using seawater or surface water, are already doing is implementing activated carbon as a backup. So if there is still some breakthrough of pesticides or pharmaceuticals through the reverse osmosis, the activated carbon will catch the rest, and the drinking water is safe. So in Belgium, these compounds are heavily monitored, and no pesticides or pharmaceuticals have ever been found in our drinking water supply. We do find them in our sewer system, we do find them in our surface water, but never in our drinking water.
We have another question, actually very interesting. In terms of commercial membranes, okay, so we have, we have specific polymers for commercial membranes, okay, they don't reveal the recipe and everything, okay. However, have you tested or have someone tested different types of material for membranes, for example, to improve that? Let's say, specific question here, graphene. Have someone tried that?
There's a lot of work being done on graphene. I'm not an expert in that field, so it's hard for me to comment. I know that there's a lot of work going on membranes and carbon type substances, in ion exchange as well, by the way, Leo, but more for electrodes. As far as I know, and I'm saying this from a non-expert view, the biggest issue with working with graphene and other carbon substances is to make your membranes stable enough, so to make them strong enough to withstand whatever we're throwing at them. That is as far as I know. I know there's some research going on, but I don't know the details.
I have another one. This is actually a very good question. According to your presentation, reverse osmosis is practically the baseline, the standard, the state-of-the-art technology nowadays. Is there any other competitor competing technology?
So if you look at economical, if you look at technologies that are market ready and economically competitive, then no, there's no competitor at the moment. But we're working on it, and Leo can tell you all about that. Because one of the competitors is one that I mentioned as well in the technology selection part, is electrodialysis. So in reverse osmosis, your driving force for the separation between the water and the salt is pressure. You push your water through a membrane and the salts are retained. And that's where your energy demand comes from. In electrodialysis, you also use membranes, but it's ion exchange membranes. So you don't push the water through a membrane, you basically pull your ions through a membrane using an external potential difference. So you're using electricity instead of pressure. This is interesting because if you think about it, in RO, you're moving all your water, which is the majority of the molecules that are in your feed stream, while in electrodialysis, you're only moving the salt, which volume and mass-wise is only a few percentages of what's in your feed stream. And in theory, just from calculations and modeling, this could be much more energy efficient than reverse osmosis. But where reverse osmosis basically has an advantage of 10 to 20 years in development. So we are working on it. It is being tested in the field. The first small applications and pilot testing is being done, but I think it'll take another few years before it reaches maturity and becomes really competitive with reverse osmosis.
We have one more question. We value your time. Thank you very much, by the way. So this is a very general question, but actually it has a point. Do you really believe that desalination is the answer for the crisis, the world crisis of water scarcity? Or, for example, would it be like reuse or some other water treatment techniques? Or is it desalination? Is that really the future?
So I don't believe that there's one solution. We're too far gone for that to say it in those kind of terms. We are too many people to feed and to provide drinking water for, to completely rely on the sources that we have at the moment, at least in the way we're using them at the moment. So as I said in my conclusion slide, priority number one should be to look at how we are using the sources that we have, the freshwater sources. To give you the example of Belgium again, one of the reasons that we are facing the shortages that we are is not only because we have such high population density, but also because every system in our country is built to remove any water that falls as fast as possible. So our sewer system, our agricultural system, we are used to dealing with floods, which have been an issue in the beginning of the 20th century, which also means that now we can't, if it does rain, the water just flows directly to the sea. So our systems should be better designed to allow for infiltration, to allow for natural replenishment of our groundwater sources, and that will already help a bunch with our drought issue and our water scarcity issues. So I very, very strongly believe that we first have to look at how to more efficiently handle and manage the sources that we have. That being said, freshwater is limited. Only 0.5% of all the water in the world is freshwater and directly accessible for human use. And humans are not the only ones that want to use that water. We have to not only take into account our households, our agriculture, our shipping, etc. We also have to take into account nature. If nature is becoming, luckily, more and more important, and we know its role and the role it plays in climate change and ecological value, and that needs water as well. So I do believe that reuse is going to be important, but again, that's reuse of fresh water. The amount of which we have is limited. And then comes seawater desalination, which is also why we are looking at it more as a backup option, probably not something that's going to, for Belgium at least, run 24/7 throughout the year as a main source of drinking water, but more something that we will put into action at times where there is a shortage, where we are facing water shortages and we do need to replenish some of our systems. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need it. But yeah, we all know we don't live in an ideal world. So I think it's important to realize that we are going to have to use it, that we are going to need it, and that if we do, we might as well do it as sustainably as possible.
Marjolaine, thank you very much for your time. We really enjoy your presentation. A lot of academics are listening to you right now. Before you leave, can you please provide some information how open you are in terms of collaborating with Ecuadorian academia, and what kind of projects and what kind of funding scheme, for example, it would be possible for us to apply with you?
Well, I'm not a big expert on funding schemes because my expertise is more on Belgium and the Netherlands and cooperations there. But we have our own resident in-house Ecuadorian, Leo. And you have a bit more experience with that. We are very open to collaborating. We have collaborations all over the world. It's always super interesting to learn how things run in other places. We can learn a lot from that. We hope other places can learn a lot from us as well. I think we're stronger by working together, and we can be more efficient and move forward faster. So we're very open. I myself, I specialize mostly in industrial water systems, drinking water, but I have colleagues that are experienced specifically in membrane systems, that are experienced specifically in agricultural systems. So anything to do with water treatments, physico-chemical water treatments, very, very open to any collaboration. And we have very good connections to groups that are specialized in biological water treatment as well, and modeling of these water systems. So if there's any opportunities there, feel free to contact us. If we can't help you, we can always put you in contact with the people that might be more suited towards your question.
Okay, once again, Marjolaine, thank you very much for your time. We really enjoy your presentation, and hopefully you can give us another presentation in the near future after your delivery, of course.
Yeah, summer next year maybe.
Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you for the invitation.
A todos los presentes les agradecemos muchísimo su presencia. Agradecemos también todas las preguntas, y como dijo Marjolaine, si ustedes tienen algún interés en colaboraciones, por favor, pueden contactarse conmigo o pueden contactarse con Marjolaine también directamente. Siempre estamos muy abiertos a poder colaborar con la Academia Ecuatoriana, especialmente en esquemas de fondos científicos y proyectos que pueden ser mutuamente beneficiosos para ambos. Así que esperaré sus contactos, esperaré sus llamadas o sus emails, y ha sido un placer estar con ustedes. Muchísimas gracias entonces.
En un entorno global y competitivo, accede a educación a través de medios digitales, sesiones en vivo, aulas y bibliotecas virtuales, metodología práctica y soporte técnico. Universidad del Pacífico, Live Streaming.